Hey, this is Father Steve, Episcopal Priest, serving here in the Episcopal Diocese of Maryland. I serve two Episcopal churches in the western part of Washington County, Maryland, St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in Clear Spring and St. Thomas Episcopal Church in Hancock, both of them in Washington County, Maryland, and the Episcopal Diocese of Maryland. This is part 4 of the study of the book of Revelation. And again, one of the resources besides the Bible is N.T. Wright's book, Revelation, where all the questions come from. I do an in-house Bible study, just a refresher, on Fridays at 10 a.m. at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in Clear Spring, located at 22 Cumberland Street. So on Fridays, if you're available to come by, we appreciate it. And then I do this format as well to pre-record Bible study. Now, as I've said with all my recordings on this format, you can pause, once asked a question, pause, and then come back to the question. So this is part 4 of the study of the book of Revelation, and I'm going to do a little intro to what N.T. Wright writes in here in his book, Revelation, 22 Studies for Individuals and Groups. So this is what he writes as we look at chapter 4 of the book of Revelation. Scientists and anthropologists have often asked themselves, what is it that humans can do that computers can't do? The writer David Lodge wrote a powerful novel on this theme entitled Thinks. The heroine eventually discovers the answer. Humans can weep and humans can forgive. Those are two very powerful and central human activities. They take place in quite a different dimension from anything a computer can do. A similar question is often posed, what can humans do that animals can't do? Again, some scientists have tried to insist that we humans are simply naked apes, a more sophisticated version perhaps, but still within the same continuum. This is a trickier question than the one about computers, but to get straight to the point, the main difference, as 24 elders in Revelation 4 demonstrate, is that humans can say the word because. In particular, they can say it about God himself. Now, before you might go in here and go ahead and read chapter 4 of Revelation, well, go ahead and read chapter 4, and we'll get back to the questions, and then I'm going to throw this out to you right now. This is kind of the icebreaker for our gathering. N.T. Wright has this question as we look at chapter 4 and begin chapter 4. He says, in your experience with your own pets or with other animals, how do they compare with human beings? What are the main similarities and differences? And this is coming to you on the heels of our annual pet blessings. So it's pretty neat to have that question thrown out to you. So go ahead, you can pause this. I'm not going to stand here and stare at the camera very often. And then we'll go into our first question. Okay, our first question. Read Revelation chapter 4, which we're in, verses 1 through 5. And this deals particularly from verse 1. What is meant by the invitation John is given? What is meant by the invitation John is given? And look at this in verse 1 of chapter 4. What is meant by the invitation John is given in verse 1? Okay. Second question. Heaven and earth are not separated by a great gulf in the Bible as they are in much popular imagination. Heaven, God's sphere of reality, is right here, close beside us, intersecting with our ordinary reality. How might this understanding shape the way we think about the door in heaven that John sees? So maybe to help you with this thinking is that heaven is not some faraway place. It's like right there in front of us. It's not some faraway place. It's right there. And this can go in with think about grief as our loved ones have passed. It's like, are they so far out there that we're so far away from them? Yes, we don't see them right now, or are they just like right on the other side of that door? Okay. The third question in chapter 4. What difference does it make in our everyday life of faith to embrace the fact that God's sphere reality is not far away at all? And that's what I just said. That's what I just said. Now, before I go any further, something I failed to do before we started our questions was to just give you a little bit of a background on my notes for chapter 4. So, the 24 thrones and elders, verse 4, this number is seen nowhere else in apocalyptic literature. Angelic beings of the heavenly court, 12 patriarchs of the Old Testament, and 12 apostles of the New Testament. So we talk about the 24 thrones and elders. So the 12 patriarchs of the Old Testament and the 12 apostles of the New Testament. Okay, the 4 living creatures. And this was a question was brought up today in, when I was doing an in-person Bible study for chapter 5 of a person who first time came into our in-person Bible study. Although I gave them the notes, they hadn't had a chance to look at them. But the 4 living creatures, verse 6, the proximity of these creatures, how close they are to God, shows that they are in imminent contact with God. Now, what are the 4 living creatures? Well, we have the lion, which means nobility, the bull, which means strength, the man means wisdom, and the eagle means swiftness. Okay? And then we talk about the 6 wings. We see this in Isaiah 6:2 and Ezekiel 1:6. The 6 wings. The wings may stand for the swiftness with which God's will is executed through nature. Okay? So I kind of had to back up there a little bit. Normally I would do that before you get into your reading of chapter 4, or any chapter as that would be. Okay, a couple more questions on chapter 4. Who sits on the thrones gathered around God's throne, and why are there 24 of them? Well, just gave you the answer. Just gave you the answer to that, right? Here's another question for you. Behind the ambiguous struggles and difficulties of ordinary Christians, there stands the heavenly throne room in which the world's creator and Lord remains sovereign. Spend a few minutes contemplating John's vision of this reality. How does it help you to understand better our own present circumstances? Just before this recording, about an hour ago, maybe an hour and a half ago, I was at a restaurant just east of where I'm recording now, and a person walked up to me and asked how I was doing and all that, and I said good, and she said, well, in the midst of all this world of things that's going on, we still have the Lord, and I said absolutely. So, but anyway, getting back to that question, our struggles and difficulties that we ordinary Christians have, how does study this, the heavenly room, help us to understand better our own present circumstances? Okay? So this is the one we've talked about, and we go back to our other notes that you should have in front of you if the folks at St. Thomas's are watching, or the folks at St. Andrew's are watching this as well. These are in my notes. But if you don't have them, do some research. But this is a question. Twice John tells us that these creatures are full of eyes, verses 6 and 8. What is implied by this image? What is implied by this image? And maybe you don't need to go to a commentary. Maybe you know it. But, you know, if you have the study Bible, look at that, or whatever source you use. I use the St. Jerome Biblical Commentary, historical commentary. I use that. I also use a couple other commentaries as well that I used in seminary. Okay, a couple more questions, and then we'll be finished with chapter 4. According to the Song of Elders, verse 11, why is God worthy of worship? Why is God worthy of worship? And then you have to understand, what is worship? What is worship? Why do we come together on Sunday? Say we come together. Of course, we have our Episcopal tradition. We have our liturgy, which is great. We have the liturgy of the Word, which is before Holy Communion. Then we have Holy Communion, the Holy Sacrament, which is great. So we are fed through our mind through the liturgy of the Word. We're fed, hopefully, through a sermon, a message, a homily. And then we were fed more spiritually and internal and physically. We're fed by the Holy Eucharist. And when we come in our Episcopal realm, we use all our 5 senses of worship. You know, we use everything for our worship. But what is worship? What is the purpose of worship? Who are we there to honor? But the question back to verse 11, why is God worthy of worship? Why is God worthy of worship? Kind of say that's like a no-brainer, right? And if you go on with this question, what can we learn from this passage about praising God as the creator of all things in our private prayers and public worship? I think private prayer is something that we do, and sometimes we're maybe feel like we're don't acknowledge it as much as we do. We talk about being a prayer community. At St. Andrew's, they're a praying community. St. Thomas is a praying community. We're always praying for someone, right? Asked to pray for someone. And prayer does not have to be some monumental thing where everybody standing near you shuts down and doesn't move. You know, prayer can be just a pause, stop, give thanks. And that's another thing about prayers. Prayers can be giving thanks. But we do pray for people that are the needs and our concerns. Now, the last question I want to do from N.T. Wright for chapter 4 is this. Humans are given the capacity to reflect, to understand what's going on, and particularly to express that understanding in worship. How might we be more intentional about allowing our thinking about God to inform our praise? How might we be more intentional about allowing our thinking about God to inform our praise? Now, a thought that just came to me was our liturgy. We follow the Revised Common Lectionary. We know what the readings are coming up. Maybe it might be a good idea to not maybe walk in on a Sunday morning in Episcopal Church or Saturday evening, you do Saturday, whatever. Maybe study that lectionary before you get there. Read the readings and have not so much of an informed response, but kind of like, well, maybe it is somewhat informed, but and this is kind of like an advice to you who are lectors in Episcopal Church, who are lectors. Unless you show up on Sunday morning, I'll use the same example, and all of a sudden somebody who's supposed to read doesn't show up, which does happen. You know, it does happen. It could be illness or emergency or whatever. But read, and if your church, gives you calendars, on the back of the Episcopal calendar are the readings for that coming Sunday. If you're a lector, and when we get back to the lectors, if you are a lector, lay reader, it's going to read, don't wait until Sunday morning to do the reading, because your inflection of your reading that can also improve in case you get the Old Testament reading. You got some of those hard, tricky words, which you should maybe try to find a resource. I have several resources that even I still use to help me figure out how's this word said, or what's his name. But if you're a lector, don't wait until Sunday morning and show up for church and read that. Do your homework, study that reading before you come to church and read it in front of people. Okay? I can't express that enough. So anyway, there we are on chapter 4. We're going to have chapter 5 come out very shortly. And so, hey, have a great one. God bless.